getting back to reading. Getting back to that interview, if you remember, with the ex-head of the drug squad, the first drug squad that had been set up in Ireland back in the 70s. Talking about one particular family that lived in a really nasty area of Dublin at the time, and there was extreme poverty. And obviously he had been introduced, or somebody in the family had been introduced to heroin, and were one of the first people in the country to have been introduced to heroin. And so the fact that Larry Dunn was earning up to 100 times the average wage, according to this guy, at the time, and doing a job that was torturing people as it dragged them one by one to an early grave. Actually, that sounds like the job description of a politician to me. What drives a person to such lengths? That's what I want to know. You know, like, we should be researching about why people do this rather than pointing fingers at blame. What's done is done. I consider myself very close friends with some of Ireland's oldest heroin addicts, some of the Dunleary, from the Dunleary area, some from Arklow, all respected within the addict communities and beyond, and still alive. Some of them are now in their 50s, which is good going for a heroin addict living under the stresses of prohibition in a state where police brutality is considered normal. These men and women are my friends. They are members of our community. They have mothers and fathers and brothers and sisters and kids and grandkids. They have up to 200 people. They have had up to 200 people arriving to their door weekly, screaming chants like the KKK would have, and scaring the life out of their kids. I'm friends with those now young adults who have told me that they had no idea that anyone in their family had a drug problem until the so-called COCAD marches, which happened around the late 90s in Arklow. Like, it was a lot later in Arklow than it was from Dublin. They are human beings. They drove what drove them down the road of heroin addiction was lack of acceptance from their immediate environment, lack of exposure to original creative arts, and lack of finances to escape. It possibly comes down to intelligence, as well as most addicts I know have above average intelligence but have been born into poverty, which means they don't get private education and they get lost in mainstream school as boredom sets in. We can't blame their families much either, as alcohol addiction was rampant and women's rights weren't really evident. There had been lots of abuse, getting back to now when these Dunns, this family of people were grown up. There have been lots of abuse and neglect. Again, to be honest, the Catholic Church had a lot to do with it, I feel. I mean, in modern times, if your partner repeatedly spends all the family income on the way home from the pub and the bookies, you leave, right? Right? Oh wait, actually, that still goes on. But anyway, that's how we end up with little kids on heroin, you know. It was because of poverty and the necessity for escape that this career looked so attractive, in my opinion. I don't know any of these guys, and I'm not saying they were all gentlemen or anything, but when life is rough, we have got to be tough to survive, and when opportunity comes your way, it is difficult to resist it. But my guess is things weren't so rosy for the Dunns either. I wonder, did any of them have heroin addictions, and if, obviously they did have heroin addictions, and if so, was heroin their first addiction, or did alcohol come first? So I would have the following questions also. How did they come across their initial heroin contact, and what was the first drug Larry Dunn ever tried and became dependent on? This guy goes on to say that Larry Dunn now isn't doing so well. I think they heard he died actually, as he didn't keep his fortune and health. Why are criminals not capable of keeping profits? This guy and the presenter of the programme then suggest that it was the Dunns who sparked off all the gangland criminality in Dublin and all over Ireland. And it's my opinion that it wasn't the Dunns that caused gangland crime. It was because the state locked them all up at once, which left the whole, well, apart from the poverty and all before, which left the whole market wide open, which caused ultimate chaos. It must have been like a land grab. It was nothing to do with the Dunn family that heroin ever became available in this country. It was because of industrialism, our education system, and its failure to look out for Ireland's future and the people of Ireland more so. It was the failure of our politicians, our lawmakers, our law enforcers, and indeed our scientists and medical staff not to be more aware in their jobs, to see that cannabis is harmless and to admit that cannabis is harmless, really. It was maybe not the order of the day to stand up to authority within the established systems, but we are more educated now, although I find that difficult to believe after my last incident with the police in Ireland. Actually not my last when I wrote this. When they actually sounded retarded in comparison to me. Now he goes on then to say, like, well, he had kind of said that it was localised to Dublin. I would like to say that, me personally, the drug scene was not isolated to Dublin at all. Arklow has always had the same illegal drugs available as Dublin. This is probably due to the seafaring industries in Dublin Port and Dún Laoghaire and Arklow. I think this ex-sergeant is simplifying the whole illegal drugs industry, and he does touch on it a few times, how he believes there must be another way to deal with toxic drug addiction. I agree with him. The other way is towards tolerance first. Through tolerance, we can bring about a platform for research. We need to take a more responsible role in toxic drug rehabilitation. Presently, we are leaving it up to various religious groups which are counter-evolutionary, really, you know. There must be secular recovery available to all, and this must be in the form of safe drugs via safe methods in a safe environment. These people are patients, not criminals. I have seen one particular rehab centre drop recovering addicts outside every pub in Arklow. Like, I drove behind them down the main street one night. Like, the name of the rehab centre on the back of the bus. These poor bastards getting out of the bus at every pub and going in and collecting money from the pubs. Like, what the fuck? These, there is something seriously wrong with that. If anything, these people are products of Ireland's sellout to consumerism and alcoholism, soft drugs. If 80%, this is according to this guy, if 80,000 ecstasy tabs are taken every weekend in Dublin, and on a really bad year there may be 6 fatalities per year where ecstasy has been taken with alcohol usually, and how many fatalities are down to alcohol? A lot. It is really even is it even really worth our while pursuing this line of thought? May more people die from horse riding? Should we criminalise riders of horses too? And of course that kind of thing was brought up by Professor David Nutt, and he was subsequently sacked by the British government. And MDMA and ecstasy should be made, and these are all my opinions again, and not from that interview. MDMA, which ecstasy should be made of, is a very useful drug for treating, I think it is Parkinson's, and actually I've seen reports lately that it kills certain strengths of MDMA taken certain ways 100% of the time kills cancer cells. So there's another blow for the chemotherapy industry. The same with LSD and magic mushrooms from all over the world. And then of course there's ayahuasca and DMT, which I didn't know about when I was writing this, as far as I know. Nobody dies from using these hallucinogens. They might think they are dying for a while, or they may even wish they were dying at times, but they don't actually die. And again, psychedelics are used to have been, and again, psychedelics are used and have been used down through the ages to acquire knowledge from the consciousness, or the greater consciousness. They have scientifically been seen to help in relieving psychosis, depression, rage, anxiety and schizophrenia rather than cause them. Our police force can't defeat the drugs problem because it is not in the interest of the state to solve the problem. There is too much profit and trade involved in policing the problem. But change in direction is promising. But we are running out of time. If we really wish to turn things around, crack and crystal meth are very fast drugs and already have a good hold from Dublin to Arklow. But the fact that the public's awareness can be drawn to this problem at such an early stage, like in Ireland, the crack and crystal meth trade hasn't taken over the country. It's fairly rampant in certain areas and within certain groups of people or whatever, but it's beyond, it hasn't reached the point of the hockey stick curve yet, nowhere near it, so, well, you don't know. But anyway, so like we're lucky in Ireland to for our awareness to have been drawn to the problem at such an early stage of the contagion. And it's possible it's positive if we can rationally work on it without worrying about profits from farm drugs or whatever. We should approach all the oldest addicts that still live here in the country and ask them to help us solve this problem from the inside. And I don't mean by ratting out dealers, I mean by asking them what they would have needed. A lot of them are actually relatively clean now, at least from time to time, and most are stable on some drug, however toxic it may be. At least they are not in pain and have and we have squandered their wisdom, which needs to stop now. We need to look at the society these people grew up in without judgment, and the society that is providing for their kids and grandkids, who are also members of the community. Today mixing as they should with our kids. Do you see where we're going? This is a problem for all of us, not just inner city Dublin, not just those of us with kids. And it isn't heroin anymore, it's crack and meth for our kids to just say no to. And I've recently heard actually about another an experiment somebody did called the park rat experiment, or the park rat experiment, and it's where they took the rats that they use for experimenting, like say addiction to heroin. They give the rats in the lab water with heroin in it and water with no heroin in it, and after a while, the rats, once they taste the heroin water, they keep going back for the heroin water, and that's where they get the idea, oh, heroin is so addictive. But somebody got the brainwave to take the experiment out of the lab and into like a park, but an enclosed park, so it had the features of the natural habitat of the rat. And they had heroin water and they had normal water, and the rats never went for the heroin water. So, because they had something to fucking do, like, they were in their element, in their environment, their ideal environment. Well, drugs don't spread because growers or dealers want to make money only. They spread because the environment of our towns and our cities is so dull and toxic and lacking in non-toxic creative stimuli for both children and adults. They are left with no other choice. The only reason most of us choose alcohol to relieve dullness is purely because of the legality and the lack of knowledge or education about other options. Alcohol causes the most harm in society, and we cannot expect people to stop drinking until we make life more interesting for them. Our total culture and community spirit gets drowned in alcohol every weekend. This is the true cause of the imbalance of our society. The promotion of alcohol and our prohibition laws affecting all other drugs. The only ones that seem to get off scot-free in the toxic drug industry are the pharma companies who produce the alcohol and other chemicals to turn opium into heroin, or coca leaves into cocaine, and cocaine into crack. And in fact, coca leaves seem to be quite harmless until they are processed using chemicals, and produce amphetamines entirely And then of course the beauty of all narcotics, methamphetamine. And now of course we have a new addition to deal with on our streets, mephedrone. But again, I would like to point out that the alcohol causes more harm in society than all other toxins put together. And if you take away the harms caused by prohibition of the other drugs, alcohol basically would cause all the harm. I'm just going to listen to this for a little bit. Find my lighter. Will we realise that the social footprint of cannabis is so light, it's actually negative. That will in fact solve a lot of the collateral damage that has been caused by the use of the toxic drugs, which have been on our streets since the 70s, and also regress the damage done by our present legal system and policing and judicial system and failing education system, let alone cure our cancers of mind, body, earth and spirit. The presenter didn't understand the phone in question referring to such high usage of cannabis, yet the lack of apparent harm that it causes. What's not to understand about that? We have such a high usage in this country, even though it is totally illegal. Even if you have cancer, and which it's been clinically tried and tested to reduce the size of tumours at least and cure. You know, like, so it's still illegal even when you need it to live. So basically every third adult I randomly meet at parties use cannabis across the social divides, from rich to poor, all faiths. Nobody dies using it. Everybody that uses it loves it. Those who don't use it don't get harmed, unlike alcohol. Where is the harm then? I think the presenter actually thinks that because there are so many arrests for cannabis use, this means it's harmful. And she would be dead right. The only harm in relation to using cannabis is the risk of getting caught using it, and what harms that will bring, like prison and a sentence, or a suspended sentence and a record. And law should be centred on the betterment of society until such time as society shakes off its toxic addictions and no law is required. It would then be a community. There should actually be guidelines, particularly in the case of drug use, as behaviour on drugs can be so radically different it would be impossible to predict what normal or average behaviour could be. What I'm trying to say is, we don't know or indeed care enough about why or what events, circumstances lead to addiction. Well, we do kind of know, but we don't accept it, you know. It's usually abuse of some description or childhood trauma, they reckon. Self-medication is what people are doing. They're giving themselves love that they're not receiving from their immediate environment. It's love we all need, and if you can't get it from people, if you've never been taught how to love yourself properly, and most people I know have no idea. They think it's a dirty concept, like. So we don't know or indeed care enough about why people end up with addiction. We have to stop being victims ourselves, stop laying blame, and start positively trying to put a stop to toxic drug dependencies. Our aim should be to stomp it out completely, and we won't ever do that by giving away other different, free, also addictive drugs to addicts. Different drugs to add to the list of toxic substances these poor humans have already been exposed to. This approach will never work, I assure you. And I'm referring there to the present methadone treatment for heroin addicts. You know, give them heroin. It's a fucking idea for you. We need to begin to embrace this problem with open arms, open hearts and open minds in order to really turn the ship around. We need to stop putting these people into cages. We need to stop putting humans into cages, generally speaking. It's not productive and definitely not cost effective. In America, it is now the #1 private profit-driven industry. Also a sweatshop where they make the protective armory for the army. Not surprising then that the American law is so strict. They need such policies to make more things illegal and therefore require the building of more and more private security prisons, hiring more and more prison wardens and other staff and more police to patrol the streets. In Ireland we basically only have, when we have 2 female, I know a lot about female prisons now. In Ireland we basically have 2 female prisons. This is in the Republic. Sorry. 2 female prisons. Do you see where this is leading? There are already planning proposals awaiting acceptance for new private American-owned prisons, I think American-owned, lined up around Ireland as far as I know. In my town and all over our country, I have seen heroin creep in at a steady pace through our streets. I now see methadone, and actually there's been no actual deaths from methadone yet. This is it's a synthetic drug, and it feels like a mixture between cocaine and MDMA. It was made quite popular around 2009 by the government's propaganda campaign to ban the head shops, but like it was a big thing for months and months and months, big debates and everywhere, and like as I was saying earlier about why these things are on the radios or on TVs, they're usually a smoke screen for something else, or something else sinister going on, and it will promote it. So like that whole thing was, they were promoting this drug, so that, because this drug had been available in head shops for a couple of years before this, and there wasn't anything said about it, and then suddenly there was like 6 months of constant talk about it, and then everybody knew it was available, so kids all knew it was available. It was spread like wildfire. There was people injecting it and no education about it at all, and that's where the problem is. All drugs should be available to addicts, and then to avoid more addicts we can possibly create taboos around them or whatever, but not to have them illegal, and then promote the safer drugs people who do want to experiment with their own consciousnesses, because they have a right. I don't know where it was. Okay. So in my town and all over the country, I've seen heroin creep in at a steady pace through our streets. I now see methadone everywhere and have reports of crack and crystal meth use. Cocaine begins as a yuppie upper class privilege. A sign of success would be to be able to offer a line of coke in a toilet of the company Christmas party. This is the beginning of the propaganda to desensitize the public about drug use. The market is then flooded with cheap diluted cocaine and amphetamines to create addiction, among the lower classes who still believe that having cocaine is a sign of doing well. Unlike the upper and upper middle classes who can relatively easily get over their habits as the cost of which hits home, there are options open to those who have money to end their dependencies on hard drugs or anything that is illegal or toxic. Plus their lives aren't so bad, like they're doing it as a recreation, they're not self-medicating so much. Many more options are open to wealthy people who find themselves using toxic drugs and becoming dependent or addicted to them. Then they lie open to the poor of our communities. When people say automatically that all addicts have a choice, it annoys me. Yes, they have a choice, but it's usually pretty unfavourable options, like it's usually pretty unfavourable options they have to choose from compared to those with money or those who have been exposed to the arts. Or if you're not arty, exposed to a passion of some description, a science or a sport or whatever, if you can't find the love from something from inside you, then you will seek out something external. You know, it's survival, we need it. It's dopamine production or whatever. Because the only place to go from cocaine addiction, if it's not abstinence, is like crack, crystal meth, and or heroin, and the usual downers that accompany heroin, like methadone and other pharma derivatives of opiates and other sedatives. These are all drugs that can and do accompany people to their deaths, and early deaths at that. Because of the usual lifelong dependency which is generally attached to these heavy pharmacy drugs, there is profit to be made. There would be little or no profit to be made from curing the individuals of their physical dependency on a toxic substance, which is progressively rotting their bodies, only making the pain of other symptoms and other symptoms of the illnesses, which otherwise only masking the pain and other symptoms of illnesses which otherwise would be evidence of where the imbalance lies or how to go about fixing the problem. So when you self-medicate or you're medicated by a GP on a toxic drug, which all pharmaceutical drugs are toxic, whether it's Valium, whether your doctor gives it to you, whether you buy it on the street, it doesn't fucking matter. It's rotting you from the inside out. There are very few drugs that don't cause physical deterioration, and those drugs I've mentioned already, cannabis and psychedelics, and I don't know about ecstasy, like, you know, it does cause physical deterioration of your body because you don't eat as much and things like that. I'm not sure whether the drug itself causes the problems. But anyway, definitely the psychedelics and the cannabis don't, but most of the drugs do. They mask other symptoms, so they mask pain. Whereas the other drugs, you can contact the source of your pain and they go about fixing it, or you can explore it with the psychedelics, like with help from somebody who knows what they're doing. You can explore your mental pain, or your psychic pain, or your deepest pain, you know, the one that's causing the physical pain, you know. On the other hand, if drugs were decriminalised and people could get their supply easily, there would be no associated crime. Drugs would be cleaner and therefore safer and more predictable. Overdose would be less likely, as would most drug-related illnesses. And as we see in Portugal, where all drugs were decriminalised in 2001, there has been no rise of long-term drug addiction in an era where such affliction has been dramatically rising, exponentially rising, just all over Europe, not just all over Europe, but all over the world. It's no coincidence that this ties in with the least stringent drug laws in the world. It's actually a 50% drop in long-term toxic drug addiction over 10 years. It is important, I feel, to plan this transition so as to use a positive propaganda strategy. We need to already have a promoted alternative available, which can only be cannabis and psychedelics in safe settings. All toxic drugs should never again be promoted in any way, for or anti. Just never mention them again. Pretend they never existed. In the public arena, this would include alcohol and cigarettes. All toxic drugs should never. The use of these drugs should not be stigmatized any more than users of alcohol are victimized under the present system. But on the same token, alcohol should be no more advertised on television than heroin. Whereas I don't see any reason why the non-toxic super beneficial cannabis and cannabis products shouldn't be flooding our television screens and billboards. And like, when I say, like, there shouldn't be really, people shouldn't be victimized because of their drug use, but like, for example, on television, and I'm not saying banning it, but it should be like a consensus that, you know, scenes aren't set in the pub, they're set in the cannabis shop or whatever, do you know what I mean? It's just, we can use propaganda and the likes of X Factor and all these things to subtly change how society reflects back, you know, because there's a perpetual loop going on. Mainstream television is putting out these images of what culture should be, and this particular culture supports the systems that keep us all in chains. And so then our youth are vulnerable, even if it's not intentionally or consciously. They absorb what the culture is being fed to them by mainstream television, and then they feed it back through what they do when they're out in town or whatever. Do you know what I mean? It's perpetual. It has been well established that cannabis can be used to treat long-term drug addiction successfully once the supply is secured, and you can use it in lots of different forms. The main problem with using weed in most situations is actually due to prohibition rather than any link to other drugs via some crazy gateway theory. Once the correct strain and strains of cannabis is prescribed, the person can grow or have the plant grown for them and be satisfied with the calming and balancing effects of prescribed cannabis. As cannabis is non-addictive and non-toxic, it can be safely used at will by the recovering addict to relieve symptoms of narcotic withdrawals and cravings. As it grows naturally from a seed under lights, there should be no reason in the world for the recovering addict to ever have to do without their medication, unlike pharmaceutical drugs, which cannot be made by the patient and must be supplied by the pharmacist. Once our prisons are emptied of those suffering from addiction and people are stabilised on non-toxins and reintegrated back into society with empathy and not one reintegrated back into a society with empathy and not one filled with mistrust and fear, our police force and prison staff can concentrate on serious crime, which should fall dramatically according to the statistics available from Portugal after their decriminalisation effort. If all goes well, the majority of this industry should need to be laid off, as would our hospital staff, as we curb the problems associated with alcohol. As the 84% of all accidents and emergency cases are alcohol related every weekend, according to HSE statistics. So we have seen how we can make a serious stab at sorting out our culture of drug addiction that exists in rampant aggression all over the world. The many causes of these drug frenzies I will look at later. The addiction and dependencies of nations are similar to those of individuals. When the addict family finally has had enough of the life of addiction, they search to replace that habit with more productive and less harmful ones. The society as a whole needs to do a similar exercise. We need to drag our culture from the depths of the darkest corners of every pub and alcohol selling establishment. We need to expose our communities to quality, original, creative arts from an early age and encourage every human being on earth to find their own original creative pleasure. This will be used not only as a personal coping mechanism, but also as a tool of communication and pleasure. I believe it is through the arts that we as adults continue to learn and act out real life learning scenarios, just as a child learns best through play. We need to expose the people of all ages to these art forms in schools, parks, markets, and on the streets. We need to use all the empty premises around our country for community-based projects, particularly where the arts are concerned and where alcohol should be frowned upon at these events. Cannabis should be promoted as it is known to open the mind and allow the artistic juices to flow. Although having said that, I believe as long as the behaviour isn't intrusive, then I don't see why people shouldn't be allowed to consume what they like. Like, it's the behaviour we need to start frowning upon rather than the use of certain drugs. Some people can drink 6 bottles of whiskey and be the nicest person on the planet, just unconscious or whatever. 6 small bottles of whiskey. And other people can take one shot and turn into violent hooligans, but then they're probably violent hooligans anyway. It's the behaviour. So maybe a couple more pages. The art of human expression. As we draw society in from the cold, there will be some that disagree about the direction, a small percentage who lose out as they had it good with the old system and refuse to change. And I think everybody should be allowed to play the game their own way. There will be upheaval and unrest within large sections of society caused by the fear propagating press, paid for by the elite, who of course are the few that will feel most at risk. But there is no other option. Humanity needs to move forward, and those who are set in their ways are free to remain in their old ways and continue with their profit-driven, problem-causing, primitive machine engine that may very well result in their downfall. As our drug laws are relaxed and less things are illegal, it stands to reason that crime will fall, if for no other reason that there are less things considered criminal. At the same time as allowing people to use whatever drugs they choose in order to feel equilibrium, we also educate the younger people of our society and the older ones of the true effects of all known effects of drugs. And I believe that use of hard drugs will die out pretty much, and only the old addicts will be left, and they will be cared for. We will use popular propaganda in the form of TV shows, news articles, in some way, as is done for profitable means, to plant seeds of truth in people's minds rather than fear. We will use the arts as our community voice of reason. We will also use it to voice our torment, oppression and anguish, and therefore stop bottling up our emotions inside our bodies when they become toxic and act like super strong magnets, attracting other similar dense vibrational happenings to our lives. We need to face the taboo subjects as every society, community and culture has them, and expose them for what they are. Opinions and theories on how we should or shouldn't live. But who made up these rules? We have to continuously ask ourselves, Are these rules relevant to today's society and in my community? And are they relevant to me? Usually they are not. We must explore these built-in principles for what they are, which are designed morals to encourage unrest, anxiety, sense of separation, fear within whole cultures of people, making them easier to control. We must move on towards a more enlightened, empowered and conscious way of living. Culture is just the set of things that are deemed okay to do and even recommended to do in public and in private among certain groups of humans. It doesn't mean that culture must be set in stone. In fact, the less set in stone it is, the more beautiful and harmonious it can be. Yes, I agree that preserving ancient culture, I agree with preserving ancient culture, but only as far as we need to study it, and sometimes sometimes so as not to repeat it or to take part in it, but sometimes, as with music and other forms of art, it's needed to regurgitate and redevelop in order to create anew. As it stands at the moment under the present profit-driven monetary system, we have huge emphasis on ancient culture and keeping it alive, but stagnant and in museums only. I disagree with this principle as it stands now. In Ireland we have a history steeped in bloodshed and invasion against our will, and the most beautiful aspects of our past cultures have been long wiped out. We do not need to dwell on what was left of the past any longer. We also do not need to primarily fund the arts that take their inspiration from the past. I'm not saying we need to forget totally about what happened. That would be counterproductive, or forget how to perform the arts. It's just we need to look at modern culture for our development. Cultures where all people of Ireland can live together and explore and enjoy each other's strangeness and differences, and let those differences mix and mingle and create new realities and new dreams. I see a modern culture, a post-colonial culture of beautiful colours and costumes and customs, with everything being okay to do as long as it doesn't inflict intended harm on others. Consenting adults should be allowed to live their lives to their own choosing without having to worry about what their neighbours would think, or what their families might say, or indeed whether or not the police are going to throw them in jail for their actions. I think the relaxing of law in general must be done in accordance and simultaneous to the slow withdrawal and need of the monetary system. Otherwise there will be unnecessary chaos and looting and so on. Once money is taken out of the equation and everything people need is available free of charge, there won't be any need to loot. In fact, there won't be any shops to loot. Just hiring centres where you can go and get the object you need for the length of time you need it. More about that later when I talk about there's a project if you want to check it out called the Venus Project, and it's by a guy called Jack Fresco. But generally, before we are so organised, there is something you can do to prepare yourself for this transition, and that is to be more generous with your belongings, to stop worrying about the time in the future when your things, whatever they are, break or wear out. Stop expecting a payout from somewhere, and stop paying insurance, like unnecessary stuff. Like, stop looking for someone to blame and start taking responsibility for your own mistakes. So basically, stop worrying about the future, stop worrying about the past. Look at where your life is now. Try and figure out what you would do with your life for community, so that community provides for you. What passions can you think of that would be beneficial? What are people going to need when money doesn't buy you everything you need? Like, they're going to still need certain things, but they're not going to need all the things that we all depend on now. I'd say a lot less people will be smoking tobacco. You know, like, think about your passions and how you can kind of change, first master whatever it is you love, and then like change into some kind of a business plan that creates enjoyable employment for others who are also interested in your activity and who are also passionate about it, and how it can benefit others for free, no money. You do it for free. You have to be willing to do it for free. So I'm going to take a break, another break now. See you next time.